Welcome, everybody, to this Rising Stars debate. I'm Maria Rodriguez, the president of the European Youth Forum, that is the platform for youth organizations in Europe. We bring together over 100 youth organizations in Europe that also gather more than 10,000 young people in all over the continent. There is only 1 week left to the European Parliament elections, and young people, we have a lot of things in our mind ahead of the elections. We are worried for the climate crisis, for the future of Europe, for our mental well-being, and also for employment. In these elections, 21 million young people will vote for the first time. And we are decided to go to the ballots and to decide to pick the political party and the candidates that are answering our questions. For the European Union to meet the challenges of young people, we need to make sure that we have more young candidates and also that we have youth representation. At the moment, only 4 out of 705 members of the European Parliament are under the age of 30. And this is unacceptable because young people, we have the talent, the vision, the experience, the ideas, and also the energy to be brilliant decision makers. We are active in our streets, in our schools, in the campuses, at our workplaces, and we deserve to be part of the decision-making table. Over the last weeks, we have seen already quite some debates with the lead candidates of the political parties. However, we, as the European Youth Forum, a youth organization that strongly believes that young people deserve youth representation, we also want to hear the vision for Europe of young leaders of the political parties. This is why we have invited the presidents of the European political parties' youth wings that are full members of the European Youth Forum to this debate. So then we can hear in the next hour from them discussing about social and economic issues, also about sustainability, democracy, polarization, and also about youth activism. During the next hour, also, the audience, you, will have the chance to challenge them and ask them questions. Now, I want to welcome our moderators for today. We will have Katie Lee and Katz Laszlo, the hosts and producers of the award-winning podcast, The Europeans. They will be the moderator of our event today, and I hope that you will enjoy it. Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to cast your vote for the European Parliament elections.
Hello to everyone joining us from across Europe, and thank you so much to Maria for that excellent introduction. Katz and I are delighted to be hosting the Rising Stars debate, and we're really happy to have with us today 4 panelists to tell us about the Europe of the future. We're going to be hearing about them, everything from their ideas on how to fix the housing crisis to how to fix the climate crisis.
Yes, and we're also very interested to hear the questions from you who are watching at home. You can use a QR code, which you will be seeing here, I believe. And so it's really good if you keep your phone on you, so you can scan that throughout. You can use that to submit questions and also to answer some of the polls we'll be using. And also feel free to send in questions about subjects we haven't talked about, and we'll get to them at the end.
Yes, we'll be hoping to hear questions. The debate today is divided into a few different topic areas. So as we enter those topic areas, it would be great if you could send questions that are relevant to, for example, the climate. But as Kat says, there'll also be some time towards the end to answer questions about any topics that we haven't had time to talk about. So without further ado, let's introduce everyone today. We have with us leaders from the youth wings of 4 of the major European party groupings. And we'll go by alphabetical order in your first names in terms of introducing you.
Yes, so from the Youth of the European People's Party, we have Derek Groot. You work on climate things when you're not busy with this political role. So we're really interested to hear more about that later.
From the Young European Socialists, we have Enric López Jurado. He is a political scientist from Pompeu Fabra University, and he has worked for 7 years for a socialist member of the European Parliament.
We also have with us the president of the European Liberal Youth, Ines Holzegger, a true European. You have lived everywhere from Belgium to Estonia, and you now work on technology in Vienna.
And finally, joining us from the Young European Greens, we have co-spokesperson Sean Currie. He's 26 and he's been involved in activism and politics for a decade already. He's done everything from being on the board of the Scottish Green Party to illegally locking himself to fossil fuel infrastructure. Keeping busy over there, Sean. All of you, a big welcome.
Yes, and we are going to kick things off with a 1.5-minute speech from each of you. But first, before those speeches begin, we would like to ask everyone at home who are following this to, via the Slido poll, using that QR code I talked about, if you could scan that and answer the question, what is the most important subject to you in this upcoming election?
We'll be very interested to hear the results of that poll in just a few minutes' time. While we're waiting for those results to come in, let's hear those opening speeches from each of you in turn. Derek, your name is first in the alphabet, so we'll start with you. Derek, of the Youth of the European People's Party.
Thank you. My name is Derek. I'm 30 years old. I'm vice president of the YEP, the Youth of the European People Party. For me, the most important topics for this election are about security of Europe, are about independence, strategic autonomy, and making a livable wage. Oh, I have much more time. Sorry. For today, I think what's the most important thing is to realize that all these ambitions that we're going to talk about today are only possible if we live in a Europe that is not threatened by an aggressor with violent force. And I think that is the one thing I missed in the preparations of this debate, is that the topic of security of Europe. And I would love to go into more detail later about that as well.
Okay, and next up we have Enric from the Young European Socialists.
Thank you so much. I mean, these elections are the most relevant European elections that we had since the creation of our union, because for the first time we have the actual chance that the far right will enter the core of the power of the European institutions by the hand of the conservatives, breaking the long-standing consensus, democratic consensus in our continent. We have seen it in many member states, and we have seen the practical consequences when they enter government. They dismantle workers' rights, they go against the rights of women and minorities, and they undermine our democracy and our rule of law. So this election is our chance to say enough is enough and to put our foot against the far right entering the institutions, but at the same time, it's our chance to consolidate the improvements and the developments that we have had in the past 5 years. And we, the Socialists, the European Socialists, are the best political family for doing that, because we want more Europe. We want a more social and equal Europe that generates quality employment with fair wages. We want a greener and more competitive Europe that leaves nobody behind. And we want a more united Europe and more secure Europe that speaks with a stronger voice in the world, but also promotes peace and human rights from all over the world, from Ukraine to Gaza. So in this election, this is the choice that we have. We have to choose between more Europe or more far right. And if you want to keep the space of prosperity, freedom and rights that is the European Union now, your ballot is the socialist ballot.
Thank you very much, Enric. Ines, let's hear from you.
Thank you. So it was already said, we're at a crossroads right now. We're facing a lot of challenges, be it from corruption to misinformation, to things that really erode our democracies from within. But we also have a slight backsliding on our basic civil liberties that we've fought for so hard. As liberals, therefore, this election is really crucial. We cannot just stand by and see all of this taken away. And for us, this is also a security issue. As was already said, there's war going on right at the outside of the European Union, but they fight every day for our freedom and our democracy as well, because the aggressor is the same as from the misinformation. And we need to therefore be a stronger player as the European Union and support Ukraine in whatever they need. But finally, also as liberals, we of course want to look optimistic into the future, and we see there's a lot of technological innovation that can ensure our prosperity. And I really hope we can also talk about some tech issues that have been very dominant in the past mandate, because I would agree that there are certain parties that, if you want to save prosperity, not vote for, but if you want more competition, more prosperity and freedom, I would say vote for the Liberals in the end.
Thank you, Ines. Last but most definitely not least, we have Sean from the Young European Greens. Take it away.
Thank you. A month ago, I was arrested. I didn't do anything illegal. Along with 20 other Young European Green volunteers, I took part in a peaceful protest inside the European Parliament, calling for the end of fossil fuel subsidies. And yet the Belgian police arrested us, denied us basic rights, and refused to explain why they were arresting us. And this is part of a trend. Not only the criminalization of peaceful protest and the scapegoating of activists, but in general, the erosion of civic space in Europe. Even in supposedly stable democracies such as the UK, where I come from, the British Youth Council recently liquidated and as yet has not been saved by the British government. So in this context, we need parties that take youth rights seriously, because we are not only in a moment of democratic backsliding, but we are in particular a moment of youth backsliding. And so I was very thankful to the YFJ for doing this wonderful analysis of the different party manifestos. A 33-page analysis. I think it's disappointing that you didn't publish this publicly so we could use it as a tool for lobbying, because it paints a very vivid picture. The EPP and ALBA got 3 and 4 points between them. The Social Democrats got 7.5, and the Greens got more than twice as many points as any of the other parties. We're the only party demanding that Erasmus is funded properly and that youth organizations are funded properly. So this June, if you want to vote for a party that gives a shit about young people, then you need to vote Green.
All right, thank you to all four of those, four of our debaters today for those opening speeches. I'm very curious to see the results of the poll. As we've been hearing from you all, people have been telling us a little bit more about the results that they think, the issues that they think are most important ahead of the European Parliament elections. And there are some really interesting results here. We're seeing democracy and the rule of law, climate and sustainability, and equality and anti-discrimination as being among the top topics there, along with affordable living and also work and social rights. If you're following this at home, you'll be glad to hear that there are plenty of questions ahead of us on all of those issues, so do stay tuned.
Yes, absolutely. And with that, let us transition into the beginning of the debate. And we encourage you, of course, as debaters, to challenge each other along the way. First, a question for all of you. We're about to head into the European elections, as we all know. What do you think are the biggest things that the EU got right and also that got wrong in the past 5 years? We'll start with you, Ines.
Thank you. So I think one of the biggest things that was absolutely necessary to push forward is the rule of law mechanism, where the Liberals were also very much in charge of this issue, because if we have a rule of law mechanism, it's really about obeying by it, otherwise no money. We've seen it a lot of times now that there are issues which we could not fix with the tools we had, but we have to fix. So this is a big thing, and also, as I was explaining, the tech agenda, there was a lot of things done in terms of ensuring equal competition and better rules for the market.
Thank you. Enric, how would you respond to that question?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I think we need to be satisfied but not complacent with what we achieved in the past 5 years. When we started in 2019, we had an agenda. We wanted to have a more geopolitical commission. We wanted to have to start the green transition and so on. And of course, we met unexpected crises, very deep crises like the COVID pandemic and then the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and the consequences that it had in our economies, but also in the global order. Among all of that, we managed to lay the foundations of the Green Deal. We managed to starting to develop the European Pillar of Social Rights. We also managed to keep the European unity when tackling the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, with up to 13 packages of sanctions that have been passed. And we also managed to overcome the pandemic, not only vaccinating people and winning the battle to the virus, but also restarting our economies and making our economies more resilient, greener, and digital. However, there are still a lot of challenges for the next mandate. We are seeing a European housing crisis that needs a solution because it's especially affecting young people. And we need, as we did the Green Revolution in these past 5 years, that we need to continue now that it's threatened by some political forces. We need to do a social revolution in the next 5 years to make sure that the European Union also protects citizens and welfare systems and, of course, public services.
And Derek, what do you think the EU has gotten right and wrong in the past 5 years?
Well, I would totally agree that the European Green Deal was by far one of the biggest achievements and extremely necessary. I really hope that we stay on course. We have to be realistic, of course, about the fact that meanwhile we had COVID, we had a war, well, we have a war. So we can't be blind to the consequences of these things happening. Therefore, I think the thing that the last 5 years I did not see enough is the sense of urgency around the dependence of Europe in geopolitical spheres. Meaning that for everything from our energy to our medicine production to raw materials to whatever, we outsourced our complete economy, basically. And I think, especially in times that are so uncertain as these, it's absolutely crucial that we have a real sense of urgency in getting back a secure food supply, secure medicine supply and production, and really, make sure that the standards of living that we are maybe even used to right now, that we don't take them for granted, and that we really invest in the strategic autonomy of Europe.
Thank you very much. Sean, finally you. What do you think we've gotten right and wrong?
Yeah, the Green Deal, as mentioned, was a huge moment, a huge step forward. That's why it's so disappointing that von der Leyen, who built her legacy around the Green Deal, has allowed her own party, the EPP, to destroy, to dismantle the nature restoration law. It looks like that's probably dead now. We got Ukraine, right? The support for Ukraine, the sanctions against Russia. We should have been doing it decades ago, divesting from Russian fossil fuels. The Greens have been saying that for decades, but we got there, or we're getting there, more or less, eventually. What we have got disastrously wrong is the situation in Israel and Palestine. Von der Leyen, after the terrible scenes on October 7th, gave Israel the green light to defend itself and has since refused to draw any red lines. So we see a humanitarian catastrophe. We see the intentional targeting of civilians by the Israeli Defense Force. And von der Leyen has refused to properly respond. We need to recognize Palestine as an independent state. We need to sanction Israel. And the European Union needs to use every ounce of power that it has over Netanyahu's far-right government to push for a ceasefire now. And that's not happening. And it's the people of Palestine who are suffering because of this after Ursula von der Leyen has given them the green light and refused to draw any red lines since.
All right, we may well be coming back to that foreign policy issue if those of you in the audience have further questions on that later. But for now, I wanted to move us on to talking about the economy and about building a better society. We've just come out of a few years that were particularly hard for young people. This pandemic has robbed young people of professional opportunities like training and in-person internships. It's been a huge strain on young people's mental health. We're also seeing changes in the workplace right now that really affect young people. The rise of artificial intelligence is changing the job market like never before. It's a time of huge change for young people. So I'd be really interested to hear from you and also from you in the audience. If you have any questions about the economy and the welfare system, please do use the QR code that you can see right there on the screen. If you would have any questions on those themes, we'd love to hear them.
Yes, and while we're waiting for questions from the audience, I would love to kick off with housing. Housing has become a huge problem across the continent, and young people have been disproportionately impacted by a huge lack of access to real, affordable, long-term housing. Everyone agrees this needs fixing, but there are some pretty different opinions across the political spectrum on how that should be done. I'll start with you, Ines. The classical, sort of stereotypical liberal perspective is that the market should just sort it out. However, clearly that's not working with the housing so far. And so I'm wondering to what extent you think that government should be intervening and what kind of specific policies they should be coming up with.
It's a really important issue as we see this all across Europe, but not in every region we have the same kind of issues and the same circumstances. So I really think this is a regional responsibility. We have subsidiarity for a reason. This is where it needs to be fixed. There's not one city that is exactly the same as the other. So we should, as on a European level, ensure that there is fair competition for building up and that there is the fair market. So the demand is met with supply, because if we cut off rents just like that, this does not build one house more. So this is what we think on the housing.
Thank you. Sean, how would you respond to that? What concrete proposals do the Greens have?
So when I was 7 years old, I was made homeless with my mum and my sister, who's 2.5 years older than me, because I lived in a village with a golf course where rich Americans would buy homes so locals couldn't live in them in order to become a member of the golf club. This is what happens when you treat housing as a commodity, as the Liberals are just advocating, instead of treating housing as a human right. We have way more than enough homes in Europe to solve the homelessness crisis, and yet there are not people living in all of those homes because they are treated as commodities for people to invest in rather than homes for ordinary people to live in. So we need to introduce, as a first step, policies like rent controls, but over the long term, we need to be ending the housing market. There should not be a housing market. It is not something that should be traded as a commodity. It is something that should be provided as a right for the population.
I do see a couple of you wanting to respond to that, but we do have a lot to get through, so perhaps we can come back to housing a little bit later if there is time for it. But for now, I wanted to move on from housing to how to actually earn money to pay the rent. Young people today don't have anything like the job stability that their parents have. You know, they're often lacking in permanent job contracts, benefits like paid sick leave. What would you like to see done specifically to give young people access to quality and stable jobs? Enric, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, we have done a lot in the past mandate in terms of improving the young people, but workers also living conditions and salaries. We did the directive of adequate minimum wages that has a very important implication in young people's jobs. We also did the pay transparency directive to ensure that men and women are paid the same for the same amount of work. We did regulation on platform work, and we did regulation also on working conditions and labor risks. But we need to continue to develop in this direction, especially with binding mechanisms and binding measures so that member states actually implement those directives when it comes to their turn. But going back to the previous issue, because it's very important that we discuss about housing, as it's the most pressing issue for young people. The housing market in Europe is broken. And we need to find solutions by, first of all, on the demand area, but especially in the side of the offer. And we are seeing that it's a European crisis that needs European solutions, and that's why the Young European Socialists are advocating for a European mechanism to promote public housing so that we can massively build apartments for young people so they can develop their projects of life even when they go to university at different cities from where they are originally from. And we have a lot of experiences as well that we have seen in the rest of the world. We need to turn office space that is now empty because of the changed telework. We need to change this space to new apartments for families and for vulnerable people, and there is a lot to do. This is the most pressing issue for youth, and we need to get it started because the market has proven to be a failure.
Thank you, Enric. One of the barriers that is very relevant to housing as well is that a lot of young people are stuck in unpaid internships, often for years before they can start working in paid jobs. Attempts to make a legally required minimum wage for internships across Europe have not yet gone through, even as we've seen pretty similar and successful policies in cities like New York. And we've also seen recently that in the European Commission, even the internships within the EU are not required to be paid with minimum wage. Derek, I'm wondering, I believe that you're the only person here who belongs to a grouping that isn't campaigning for a ban against unpaid internships, and I'm wondering what the argument is. Why do you think those should continue?
So I think if we go back to the first topic, which is what do you want? You want a good job. You want a job that makes you happy. I think the only thing that will make you happy is if you have a sense of meaning in this job. And how can you, straight from school, find out what that meaning is? I think you need lots of different experiences. I'm personally very much in favor as well of, it's called a societal duty year. So for 1 year, you, I don't know, work as a volunteer at maybe the hospital or a elderly care home. And I think it's extremely important for the youth nowadays to really allow yourself some time. Don't get caught in this rat race, but really take some time to figure out what's your purpose. And, you know, then life is, you don't have to figure it out everything before you're 25 or something. So I think 1 year or half a year here and there to explore what you like, I don't see the problem in that.
Thank you very much. I would love to let you respond, but we do have a lot to get through. So I am going to move on to the questions. I'm sure there'll be another opportunity to speak, though. We have a question from the audience. What would the panelists say to a person working a 0-hour contract for Uber? Why should they vote for the European Parliament? And I will encourage you to keep your answers short.
Who would like to answer that one?
Go ahead.
Go for it, John.
The platform directive passed by the European Parliament is a good first step that was defended by Kim van Sparentak, who used to be the co-spokesperson of the Young European Greens. What we need to do is regulate platform work so that people working jobs in the platform economy have the rights of ordinary workers. That is, if they fall ill, they know they'll be paid. That is, that they know there is a basic sustenance that they will have to live on. Because right now, the platform economy is essentially a loophole to exploit workers and deny them the basic rights that we all deserve.
Would anyone else like to come back on that?
Absolutely. I mean, it was a very good report as a response to the proposal made by Commissioner Nicolas Schmit that was also inspired in the work that the Spanish government has done with the rider law that wants to protect this kind of workers that are often seeing very difficult working conditions, zero rights, and when they have an accident or a tragic situation, they are completely abandoned and they cannot, and in some cases, they cannot even access medical health care. So it's fundamental that we continue to protect from the European Union the most vulnerable and continue to widen the framework of rights for all of our workers.
Just to take things back to what we were discussing a second ago, this question I think is for you, Derek. Marta writes, so only the economically privileged people should have the ability to figure out their purpose. What would you say to that?
Well, I didn't say it was an unpaid voluntary job. I mean, it's voluntary in the sense that you don't have to do this societal year, but of course I think you should be compensated by the government for that year. Yeah.
Would anyone else like to come back on that?
That's not what I said.
Oh, so you disagree with your own party and you think unpaid internships should be banned?
No, that's also not what I said.
So do you think unpaid internships should be banned?
I think that if a company finds people that want to do that, why forbid it?
So uphold the system of privilege that Marta, who's just asked the question, mentions. So those who can afford to do unpaid internships get a head start ahead of the rest of us out of university and then better their CV so that they get the better jobs.
But we have scholarships, we have dozens of ways to get ahead. It has nothing to do with privilege in that sense.
It does have a lot to say about privilege, because we should all agree on a basic principle, that is all work should be paid. And trainees and people that are studying and need to have a professional experience before they graduate are not an excuse for companies to make free work and even improve their benefits even more.
Okay, but what?
One important issue there is also start in the European institutions. There are a lot of internships paid, but what about atypical ones? There are still certain things that are not paid. So we really have to also start there. Slimek, we of course also support the ban on unpaid internships in the private sector, but also start at home. And this is for all of us, I think, who have mother parties in the European institutions to actually do some work.
Absolutely, our parties have defended that, and the internships in our parties, at least I think, are all paid. Yeah, in our political
talking about
groups
the institutions.
and in the parliament as well.
I think it's very clear how each of your parties feel about this. Thank you for the very interesting debate. We are going to move on to the next section, and we would very much welcome questions about this subject too, because it is climate and the ecological crisis. That sounded jollier than I meant it. In the next part of the debate, we will be talking about that. And obviously, this is an issue that affects young people more than anyone in the world, just because we will be here for longer. If you're following this at home, please send in your questions, as we said. To get more specific, we've seen a bunch of really big flagship EU policies, like the European Green Deal, getting watered down in response to, among other things, the big farmers' protests across the continent. Derek, the European People's Party has been one of the loudest voices pushing for lighter environmental regulation in response to these protests. And yet, at the same time, there is a climate crisis that we do have, that it needs addressing. And young people have been feeling betrayed about this adjustment. I'm wondering, how do you justify the EPP's position on this?
So first of all, I would disagree with your statement that we have given up, or we have in any way reduced the end goal, because that we didn't do. And it's still very clear that we need to be climate neutral by 2050. So I think that's very important to stress. Second of all, I want to, at least from my perspective, we are at war in Europe. And of course, the climate is extremely important. Like I told you before, I'm a sustainability consultant myself. My literal livelihood depends on this topic being taken serious. However, if Russia comes and invades Europe and we're not prepared, there's like, I don't think that we should give them the room to do that. As of now, Russia has 5,500 nuclear warheads. They have 3.5 million active soldiers. They tested the Tsar Bomba, which was, I think, in 1961 already, which was 3,000 times more powerful than the bombs in Hiroshima. And you know, like this is the aggressor that we're dealing with. This is the threat that we're facing. So I think we should not give up on the end goal, but we should not stick our heads in the sand when it comes to the threat that we're facing as a continent.
Sean, something that's been coming out of certainly the media reporting around the farmers' protests is that on the one hand you have farmers saying, you know, what we're being asked to do is not economically viable, and we also have environmental activists saying, you know, not tackling the climate crisis long term is not financially viable. How can we get these two sides to meet? How can we make policies that take both of those two sides into account so that we can have lasting policies on this?
I think the starting point is to not listen to Ursula von der Leyen, who waters down the Green Deal in response to the farmer protests as if it was green policies that are the problem and not the fact that farmers cannot earn a decent living. During the inflation crisis, which we all paid for, supermarkets made billions of euros of profits, while farmers' income went down by up to 20%. Now, we need to be serious about the level of crisis that we are in, that we are looking forwards to a world of increasing wildfires, droughts, floods, famines, conflicts that Derek is so focused on. This is a systemic crisis that needs systemic solutions. And the business as usual response by the likes of von der Leyen, but I would say all of your parties, is to have some nice climate policies, but then do what von der Leyen's doing and sign fossil fuel deals with the likes of Egypt, Qatar, and Azerbaijan. The alternative is to treat this crisis as also an opportunity, meaning that we can shift the power from those dictators and from multinationals like Total, Shell, and BP towards ordinary people by rapidly scaling up renewable energy. And one of my favorite policies, for example, the German Greens passed in government, is to incentivize ordinary people to put solar panels on their balconies. You can take that power that multinationals currently hold because of fossil fuel economy and put that in the hands of ordinary people. So if you want a courageous course of action in response to the climate crisis, and not just to make the climate discussion a defense discussion, as the EPP love to do, then you need to vote green to build an economy that puts people and planet ahead of profit.
I do have one follow-up question about the climate for you, Sean, and specifically about energy. The European Greens advocate for phasing out nuclear energy across Europe, including nuclear plants that are already open. But advocates for nuclear argue that this is an enormous and necessary help in this moment in the transition when we're also trying to phase out of coal and out of oil. Can you really justify closing down even open nuclear plants right now in this moment of the transition?
So the Greens are not suggesting that tomorrow we should shut all nuclear power plants. But we need to be serious that nuclear is not a sustainable energy choice, it's not an affordable energy choice, and it is not an energy choice that puts power in the hands of ordinary people. I don't want to build an energy system that pays Rolls-Royce billions of euros to build a nuclear power plant and then controls all of those profits, that uses an extremely intense water cooling system. So we need to steadily, and this is the key, steadily phase out nuclear power plants while scaling up renewable energy and rapidly phasing out coal and oil and gas.
When we zoom out and look at our economic model and the way that we consume things, I'm wondering what you all think about whether that economic system that we have is compatible with the climate goals that we have, or if we fundamentally need to shift it. Should we be looking at ideas that are being bandied about at the moment, like degrowth, for example, or would that put our continent in an economically vulnerable position? Ines?
So as liberals, as young liberals, we do not see the climate crisis as just a defense crisis, but it is also a security issue. When we look at how much gas is imported from Russia, which on the one hand is security, on the other hand it's of course way less sustainable than having nuclear power plants still operating within the EU. In terms of what we also want, it's a real emission trading system that is working, where the European Union is also advocating on a global scale so that we don't get into a situation where we just put it outside of the EU and the European Union is in a less competitive state. For us, it's also really important to see that there are new technologies that are developed within the EU, which we should harness. We should really focus on getting more technology to also help us with the climate crisis, which is an imminent crisis. But a lot of the solar panels right now also get developed outside of Europe. They come from China. This cannot be our target. We need to have technology and innovation in here. And this only goes with having investments and with having the market to foster such innovation.
Thank you. I think that's all we have time for, so we're going to move on to the audience questions. We will give you the first chance, of course, because we haven't heard from you yet. I'm going to start with this question about fossil fuel subsidies. Narita from Narita says there's a lot of good things that can be done with the enormous amount of money that goes to fossil fuel subsidies. So why do they still exist? Enric?
I think it's pretty clear that we need to phase out fossil fuels and we need to use and invest that money in a better way. And it's clear that that's renewable energy. Nobody is now building nuclear plants because they're more expensive, they're less efficient, and they most importantly, more dangerous. So the future has to go through an ambitious plan for developing and implanting in the territory renewable energies. But coming back to the previous discussion, I think it's very important that we as a young generation refuse the framework that the fighting against climate change agenda and the agricultural agenda and the challenge that our agricultures are having in Europe are incompatible, because they are the same sides of the coin. Our farmers and our farmers are the most affected by the climate crisis to date. We are seeing it in regions like my own, that they have suffered for 3 years the most extreme drought that they have seen in history. And we need to continue to push those measures like CAP that have put a lot of money into developing what they are doing, into helping them, and so on. And also, I find it very funny that we are seeing the EPP pushing the narrative that the CAP that they are now the defenders of the CAP and so on, and that they need to protect farmers more. But the farming commissioner has been in the hands of the right or the extreme right for the past 20 years. The European Commission presidency has been in the hands of the right for the past 20 years. So I only assume that they have had enough time to care about the farmers. So we need to find together a way on helping the challenges that the farmers, of course, have. We are witnessing them, and it has a lot to do with a broken value chain. But we also need to not make a pause with climate change, because it's obvious that we cannot negotiate a pause with climate change.
Sean, if you've got something brief to add?
On fossil subsidies, the Greens are the only party that are promising to phase out government money going into the hands of fossil fuel companies. The IMF says 500 billion euros in the EU are going to fossil fuel companies from the public pocket. And this, I think, highlights a bit the hypocrisy of the Social Democrats. I'm sorry, but you say we need to phase out fossil fuels, but your manifesto doesn't say we should stop funding fossil fuels. Your manifesto says, for example, we should ban unpaid internships. But your own lead candidate, Nicholas Schmidt, had control of the Commission that had the chance to ban unpaid internships. And he released a recommendation that did not ban unpaid internships. This was after the European Parliament legal analysis said that he had the power to ban unpaid internships. This was after the European Parliament, including his own party, voted overwhelmingly to ban unpaid internships. Now his own party is saying we need to ban unpaid internships at the European level, and yet he's pretending that he didn't have the power to do it. This is the classic Social Democrats. They're all talk and they're no action.
I'd like to hear briefly before we move on from you again, Derek, because once again, you do work on the climate. There's another question from Lucy here. Is it fair to expect young people to lead climate action while older generations and corporations contribute significantly to emissions?
No, of course not. But who says that that's the case? I think there was a very great example a couple of months ago where the 2,000 older people in Switzerland basically, the judge said that the Swiss government was not owning up to its own ambitions, and that was 2,000 old people. So, like, everyone needs to care about this, because everyone is a person living on this planet. Like, that's quite an obvious one, I think.
Thank you.
Just because I was clearly requested and interpelled by my colleague from the Greens, you know very well the legal limitations for a directive like this to explicit that member states should ban unpaid internship. The directive is extremely crystal clear, saying that all work in the form of internship should be paid. And Nicholas Schmidt has done more to protect young people and to improve young people's lives than any of the Green MEPs sitting today at the Parliament, through doubling the budget of the Erasmus+, through the directive of minimum adequate wages, through the directive of platform work. So he has been a champion for youth for the past 5 years. I am very proud to have worked with him in many issues, and we are very proud as well that our former president, Alicia Oms, has also done an incredible work in defending young people in the Parliament, but also working with Nicholas Schmidt.
I'm sorry, but the European Parliament's own legal analysis said that he did.
People at home do want to hear more about this, and obviously feel free to submit questions at the end. For now, we are going to move on to we're going to shift gears a bit, and I'm going to ask a couple of different questions that fall under one of the biggest subjects in this election, which is populism and polarization. Once again, feel free, audience members, to send in your questions using the QR code. I am going to start with the youth and the far right. Even as young people have been seen as the face of climate activism, we are also seeing a trend of young people voting more and more for far right parties across Europe, rather than mainstream ones like the ones we have today. Enric, I will start with you. Why do you think that centre-left parties have, on the whole, failed to hold the appeal of young voters over the far right?
Well, what we are seeing in the trends is not specifically that. What we are seeing is that among young voters, young women are moving more to the left side, and young men are moving more to the right side. And that's definitely something that we need to address, and there are a lot of things that are intertwined in this. We have to talk about opportunities, about inequalities. We have to talk about the role of social media as well. That has a lot to do. We are seeing now reports in Germany on how TikTok was designed to lead you to content for alternative for Deutschland. So we need to address all of those issues. At the end of the day, what we need to do is make sure that our young people have opportunities to develop their projects of life, and that means having decent education, decent public services, having a good transition from education to the labor market, and that they don't fall in despair. And that's why it's so important that we continue to provide this, because then if we don't, and they don't have opportunities, it's very easy that populist forces and far-right forces are going to propose simple solutions that are non-existent solutions, because we know that to none of these challenges there is a simple solution, but that they are very easily sold to the public and accepted by some people. So we need to make sure that we reduce inequalities, and we need to make sure that young people have enough opportunities.
You mentioned TikTok a second ago, and TikTok is a platform where parties like the AfD, the Rassemblement National in France, their content has been doing very well. Ines, I'd be interested to hear from you. How do you think European regulators should balance the right to freedom of speech against the need to fight hate speech and disinformation online?
I think that's a really relevant topic. I want to go a bit also to what was said in terms of having populist, easy answers to very complex problems. And this is where it's really upon all of your parties to also say we have certain issues, namely what we call chat control, the CSAM. This is about content moderation. This is about scanning all of the chats, all of the emails from each and every person under the umbrella of we want to protect kids. Of course, each and every one of us wants to save the kids, and especially from harassment. But scanning all private messages, all emails that are ever sent inside of the EU, this cannot be the answer. That's why us as LIMEC, we're very vocal on stopping the chat control. And I really want to also talk to the audience there. Ask your candidates for the European Parliament if they get elected, if they will vote for this chat control, because this would mean that all of your chats, all of your emails are just read. And this is something where we're very strongly against.
Thank you. We have one last question about populism before we move on to the audience questions. Derek, it looks like the EPP is going to emerge as the largest party, as the largest group after the European elections. And there has been growing pressure on Ursula von der Leyen about whether or not she rules out working with the far right. So far, she hasn't. Do you think that the EPP should rule out this collaboration?
I don't think we should rule out anything before we talk to each other. I think, denying democratic results is not going to make democracy better. So instead of just upfront already canceling whomever, I'm a big fan of just keeping an open mind. And we're constantly talking about the far right, but I think the extreme left is just as much of a problem for a threat for our democracy as the far right.
Thank you. That's a clear answer. It is time for us to move to our audience questions. Let me see.
Perhaps we can go back to technology for a second. What is your position on AI? Should there be more innovation or regulation? Who would like to take that question? Ines.
I'd like to take that. So with the AI Act that was proposed in the current mandate, we already took a really big step towards having, on the one hand, regulation of very high risk applications for AI. So something where we say as Europeans, we do not want this. But on the other hand, also encouraging innovation, because this is something I think we really need to keep in mind whenever we talk about regulating more and more and more. We also need to have the space for innovation, to have companies, startups improve their own tools. And speaking of tools, it was mentioned before that workplaces, work in general will develop. It will change because of AI, because of AI tools. And we should also embrace the change, and while having in mind that there are certain ethical implications that we have to be aware of. But we should also say, well, your job currently is like that, but it could be even better because you don't need to do this and that task that you don't like to do anyway, but you can focus on more creative work. And I think for now we have a good foundation. We really need to look into the implementation, and that we give some space to breathe also for the economy.
I have one more audience question here. The far right is super organized online, and their coordinated campaigns trolls TikTok. With their coordinated campaigns, trolls TikTok and more. What is your vision to be more digital savvy and how to beat them? Who would like to answer that? It looks like you, Sean.
So just to come back on this, Derek, you think we shouldn't rule out working with anybody? So do you think the EPP, for example, should rule out working with the ID party, one of the two far-right parties? Or no, just to have this clear?
No, in general, I mean, we had the same discussion in the Netherlands.
It's kind of yes or no.
It's kind of, I will answer how I want to answer. And that's the fact that democratic results are democratic results. If you're like denying the results of this election, that's your choice. But I choose to believe in our electoral process. I choose to believe in a democratic European Union. And that means that we have to deal with whatever that result is, as much as you may not like it. And we have the same right now in the Netherlands. And in the beginning, yes, might feel very scary because it's very radically different from what you want and believe. But in the end, right now, we have actually a coalition that is more nuanced, more balanced than I think anyone would have predicted beforehand. So yeah, I'm not a favor of creating these extremes and canceling people. And you know, I'd really hope we could just try to, work together on a prosperous Europe.
Enric, one last
I
response,
think
and then we'll move on.
denying the results of any elections. I mean, if there are a lot of extreme right, populist, and I will leave it there. Parties, and parties, they are going to be seated at the parliament. Nobody is denying their right to be there if they are elected. However, we are very clear on our position and our stance. We will not cooperate with the far right. Any kind of far right, because everybody's now trying to bring Meloni into their boat, but we remember the words of Giorgia Meloni in Malaga in Spain, saying that the family was only a natural family between a man and a woman, and then the rest was the LGBT lobby, and saying a lot of things that we thought had been forgotten in Europe for a long time. We will not allow these people to drive us back to dark times in Europe. And I'm very sad, actually, to see a political family that has a lot of history and has done an incredible contribution in building the European project to be now going after these people in order to cling to power. I think we should know best as Democrats, and we should work better to make sure that these people stay out of the institutions, because our rights and our freedoms depend on that.
Time is moving very swiftly on, so I'm going to move us on to the final part of the debate, and we want to talk now about something that is very close to the hearts of everyone in this room, which is giving young people better access to politics and making young people in politics more visible. So please, if you do have questions along those themes, please do send them in. I was interested, I was looking for sort of the statistics the other day on the average age of MEPs, and I found a very eye-catching statistic, which is that the average age of a Lithuanian MEP is 65. That is the average age. So I wanted to ask, do you think that your party groupings are doing enough to help young people get elected? Sean.
So I can come back to this point, but I wasn't able to speak on the last point. So just to say, you say that von der Leyen, that you should not say we don't work with a particular party ahead of time. Von der Leyen has said that she will not work with the ID, so she sees the reasoning for why you should not work with the far right. And there will be a pro-democracy majority in the next parliament. And yet she stood on the stage at the Eurovision debate and she defended Giorgia Meloni, who is eroding the right to abortion, who is eroding the rights of same-sex couples, who is eroding democracy in Italy. And von der Leyen has refused to work out ruling with the ECR, where we have Vox, who have said that the best days of Spain were under Franco, where we have Zemmour in France, who says that France needs a French Putin, where there is peace in Poland, who have eroded basic civil liberties.
Sure.
It is not not a cancel culture to say that we will not work with those forces that are eroding democracy.
We have spoken for several minutes already about this issue, and I do want to get to some questions about young people's visibility in politics. So I'll ask you again, do you think your party grouping is doing enough to get young people in politics elected?
Yes, absolutely. I just because I wasn't able to speak on the issue before, so I think it was fair to speak about it. The European Greens have a resolution on supporting young candidates. As the Young European Greens, for example, I think we're the only youth organisation to have a young candidates platform where we're supporting 55 young candidates. And I think it's important for me to say, as we're here on and maybe you can tell me if you do, I might not know about it. On a male majority panel here, we have 6 top young candidates, all of whom are female. We are supporting them. We're supporting activists like Lena Schilling, the other co-spokesperson of the Young European Greens, Benedetta Scuderi. In the manifesto of the European Greens, we support the right to vote at 16. We support political education. We support, as mentioned before, we're the only party to say that we need to properly fund youth organizations. We need to properly fund Erasmus+. So these are the ways that we can encourage young people into politics and encourage also particularly European politics and European integration.
Ines, what about you?
Yes. So no, we also have a platform where we train, encourage, and most importantly, connect the young candidates. And for us, it was always important to say it's not enough to just listen to youth. Youth also needs to have a seat at the table. Unfortunately, youth does not get asked to sit at the table, so sometimes we need to be loud and we need to claim that seat. For our mother party, ALDE, youth has also a really important position. Namely, there has been the Alliance of Her, where it's about encouraging female politicians, women in politics, to train, to network, and to find their purpose in politics. And ALDE has also funded the youth edition on this to especially connect the young female politicians. And this is not just for the campaign, for the elections. This has to be and is something that is continuous and that we also need to continue after the elections. Because yes, now we have EU elections, but there's many more European, national, regional, local elections where we need way more young people at the table and way more also young women at the table.
Something that's going to be different in these elections is that for the first time, 16-year-olds in Belgium and Germany are going to be able to vote. Most of the people here today agree that this is something that should be expanded across Europe. It's a good idea. But the youth of the European People's Party are not in favour of the vote for 16-year-olds. Derek, why is that?
Well, I don't think it's an EU competence to decide for every member state what the age of voting should be. I do believe it's extremely important that youth has a voice, and in the Netherlands, we're discussing some ideas like giving to certain topics more weight to the voice of young voters. And this could be a very interesting idea to work out. It has been tried in the parliament. There is some sort of subcommission that looks at intergenerational problems and stuff like that, but that is a very interesting development, I think. And most important of all is that we, not just that people become active, but that people know about politics and care about politics. Because if we can't reach a big number of young people, there might be a complete generation that just, disengages from the whole political system. And that's by far the biggest threat, because then you will only see the most extremes, because only they will be promoted on TikTok and whatever. Whereas if there's a more broad general engagement among the young people, I believe that's absolutely crucial for functioning democracy.
Maybe I can I would love to have you respond, but we have time for one last question that I do think is very important. It's about student activism. We have seen a wave of students across the continent protesting for their universities to cut ties with Israel in response to the large-scale bombardment of Gaza by the Israeli government, causing a huge number of lives. There have been reports of violent clashes between police and students at universities across Europe, with a mix of reports on who started this violence and also on who escalated this violence. What do you think about the police response to these protests, starting with you, Enric?
Well, I think that's an example of how politics can be done further away from political parties. And it's really inspiring to see all these young people in universities and in many other places standing up for their beliefs, for their values, and for what they think, and think very right, that it's a cruel situation happening in Gaza and in Palestine in general. I will be very clear. We do not tolerate any kind of violence against students. They are exercising their right to peaceful protests, and they should have the right to manifest what they think and their defense of their values without the intervention of the police, especially if it happens within the limits of what should be a sacred area that is a university, which is a space for reflection, for debate, for the respectful exchange of ideas, and not for violence and repression. So it's very inspiring to see them fighting for their values and for a vision of the world that we share. And it's unfortunate that we didn't have the time to discuss about this issue more, but I am very proud of the positions that most of our political families are taking in this issue right now, because what we are seeing is completely unacceptable.
Thank you very much. Ines, what do you think about the police response to these student protests?
Violence can never be an answer, and there always needs to be the right for peaceful protest. Going a bit back to the question of student activism and also answering to the question of vote at 16. I want to tell a bit of a personal story. I myself, coming from Austria, have been able to vote at 16, even many, many years before, because it has been the case that we can vote at 16. And I've never felt more empowered than this. And I've never been more interested in politics than when I was able to vote. So we should really encourage this. We should really encourage students, be it on a school level, where they can still, within the classroom, ask questions. Because, of course, we cannot get all the answers from TikTok. We should not get all the answers from TikTok. And then afterwards, I went to university, and there I got involved into student politics. Never violently, always based on discussion. But I do think that being able to vote this early really encouraged me to also take a step on a more active seat and to actually expose myself in politics, which it is sometimes quite an exposure.
We're going to take a couple of questions now from the audience. And as we are drawing quite close to the end of today's debate, I really encourage you to really just pose any question that you would like to, regardless of the topic. If there's something that we haven't had time to speak to right now and you really, really want to hear about it, now's your chance to ask. But I'll stick with this theme of representation broadly and ask a question from Hannah. How are your parties going to protect the rights and freedoms of minority groups in Europe, in particular the rights of trans and non-binary youth? Enric, how about you?
Well, I mean, in my political family, we have had examples of very progressive laws passed to recognize the rights of all minorities, but especially of the LGBTIQ community, from the first laws on marriage equality in the early 2000s, from now the latest trans law in Spain that we made a reality, not, of course, without discussion and without complexity, but we managed to make it a reality to make sure that trans people have their rights defended. I think it's fundamental that we focus as well in the next 5 years in this, because the threat of the far right is to roll back in everything that we did at national level, but also at European level. Let's be reminded that we still don't have a directive on anti-discrimination because it's blocked in the Council. And if the member states continue to get more and more influence by the far right, it's going to be even harder to unblock. So there is a lot to do, and it should be a priority for the next years.
And perhaps one more question from the audience, and this is from Amy. How can we motivate more young people to get involved in European politics? The four of you are very involved, but you are perhaps not necessarily representative of the generation. Any bright ideas for getting more young people involved in politics at the European level?
Yeah, I've been thinking about, in general, how to make politics attractive for young people. I consider myself still quite young, but apparently the audience is even younger. The main thing is that politics can be extremely boring. It's technical. There's sometimes people will talk for hours about the same thing. It's not anywhere close to sexy or anything that's like that people would watch on their own free time. So I think if we want to get people involved in general, but especially young people, with this really short attention span, we should make politics sexy again.
Make politics sexy again. All right.
Unforgettable.
Sean, your hand is waving at me.
We should make politics sexy again, and we should talk about the issues that people care about. And I'm sorry, but there are two representatives here who have not mentioned Palestine. I'm sorry, but look at what is happening in Rafah. Look at the children in tents, burning alive. How can you sit on here and have a political debate and not talk about Palestine? Yesterday in Brussels, we saw police violence with water cannon and pepper sprays. My wife was there. She was there for 3 hours, kettled in by police before she came home drenched. We see that on student campuses as well. The suffering in Palestine is translating in Europe into a movement of solidarity and of power that is standing with the Palestinian people, and our politics is not representing that. As the Young European Greens, we stand in solidarity with the people being killed in Palestine today.
I think there was a slight accusation in there from two of you who hadn't talked about Palestine. Would either of you like to make a comment on that?
No, yeah, I think it's quite clear that we agree on the fact that we need a two-state solution. I don't. Yeah, we should create the conditions for this as soon as possible, and I don't think we disagree on anything here.
Thank you for responding, Ines.
As liberals as well, so we want to have an immediate ceasefire onto Gaza. The things happening in Rafah, this is unacceptable. But of course, we always have short time, so I don't see this accusation as rightful, because we do have policy on this issue as well, because our members care about this issue. So.
All right. In a second, I'm going to give all of you the chance to give a final message to the audience watching this today. But I'm also very curious to hear from you in the audience about who you found most convincing over the past hour. So if you look at the screen there, you should see a poll cropping up, which asks you the question, who convinced you the most? And that is a question to bear in mind as you listen to these final closing messages. I'm very kindly going to give each of you 30 seconds to, yes, give a final message to the audience watching today. Derek, we'll start with you.
All right. Thank you. So, I think it's extremely important, as we discussed on all these topics, to vote 6th of June until 9th of June. And I believe that if you want real answers and not just emotions, you should vote for the EPP.
Thank you. We'll move on to Enric.
I know what you're thinking. How yourself, as a young voter or even a first-time voter, can you make a difference in an EU full of challenges? Well, your voice matters. Our vote also matters. If we don't show up to the vote, to the polls on 9th of June, we are going to let other people make the decisions that are going to affect our life. So join us to make a more social, greener, and feminist Europe, because remember, Europe belongs to youth. See you at the polls.
Ines, how about you?
So in a week, we really have it in our hands. And it's so important that we don't let others take this decision from us. So really go out and vote. Vote for those candidates that you feel most represented by. As liberals, we really want not only young candidates, which of course we encourage, but also we fight for a more prosperous, secure Europe.
Thank you, Ines, and of course, Sean.
In a week, we have a choice. We could go down the business as usual path, which the Social Democrats and the Liberals will take us down, which means climate crisis, which means escalating inequality. We could go down the path of the EPP, which is to work with the far right instead of pro-democracy forces, or we could make the courageous choice of taking real action in this time of crises. That's why you need to vote, and that's why you need to vote green in a week.
Thank you, Sean. And we are now shifting to see the results of that poll and see what the audience thought. Ooh, it is very close, but the most persuasive person, according to the audience, was Sean. Congratulations.
It was a very small clap, Derek.
Yeah, no one joined me.
Thank you very much to all four of you. We had a really enjoyable time hosting this debate, and now we have just a couple of days left until the final day that we have to vote. It is the 6th to the 9th, depending on where you are in Europe, but please go and do that and persuade everyone you know to do the same, and maybe they can come with you. Happy voting, and see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Well done, everyone.